There stood an old, weathered antique shop that most residents ignored. It was crammed between two abandoned buildings, its windows fogged with dust and time. Inside, the store was cluttered with relics of the past, cracked mirrors, tarnished jewelry, and faded photographs of people long forgotten. One rainy afternoon, a young girl named Emma wandered into the shop. She was 11 years old, with a curiosity that often got her into trouble. The door creaked ominously as she entered, the bell above it tinkling weakly. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a hunchback and piercing blue eyes, greeted her with a crooked smile. "Looking for something special, dear?" he asked, his voice raspy. Emma shrugged, her eyes scanning the shelves. "Just looking." As she wandered through the narrow aisles, something caught her eye. On a dusty shelf, tucked away in a corner, sat a porcelain doll. It was no more than a foot tall, dressed in a tattered lace dress with a matching bonnet. Its eyes, a deep, unsettling shade of blue, seemed to follow her every movement. Despite its worn appearance, there was something about the doll that drew Emma in. "How much for this?" she asked, holding the doll up to the light. The shopkeeper's smile faltered for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "That doll is not for sale," he said, his tone grave. "But it was on the shelf," Emma argued, her grip tightening on the doll. The old man hesitated, then sighed heavily. "Very well," he said slowly. "But you must remember this, child. That doll is cursed. It has brought nothing but misfortune to those who have owned it. If you take it, you must never under any circumstances play with it at night." Emma, not one to believe in such nonsense, nodded eagerly. She handed the man a few crumpled bills, and with the doll clutched tightly in her arms, she left the shop. That night, as the rain battered against the windows of her small bedroom, Emma sat on her bed, the doll resting beside her. She examined its delicate features, the way its glassy eyes seemed so lifelike. She remembered the shopkeeper's warning and smirked to herself. "Just an old man's story," she whispered. Ignoring the warning entirely, Emma decided to play with the doll. She arranged its arms and legs, making it sit upright on the bed. Then she did something she would soon regret. She wound up the tiny key protruding from the doll's back. A soft, tinkling melody filled the room as the doll's head slowly turned, its eyes locking onto Emma's. The music was hauntingly beautiful, but there was something off about it, a discordant note hidden within the tune. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. The doll's once pleasant expression morphed into a sinister grin, its painted lips curling up at the corners. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as the doll began to move on its own, its limbs jerking with unnatural precision. "Why did you wake me?" a voice whispered, soft but menacing. Emma's eyes widened in terror as she realized the voice was coming from the doll. Frozen with fear, Emma watched as the doll stood up on her bed, its head cocked to the side. "I was sleeping. Dreaming," the voice continued, the doll's eyes narrowing. "But now I am awake." Emma tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. The doll moved closer, its tiny hands reaching out for her. She backed away, but it was too late. The doll lunged at her, its fingers digging into her flesh with surprising strength. Emma struggled, but the doll's grip was like iron. The room spun, and the last thing Emma saw before darkness claimed her was the doll's malevolent smile. The next morning, Emma's parents found her lying in bed, the cursed doll clutched tightly in her arms. Her face was pale, her eyes wide open but lifeless. The doll's eyes, however, seemed to gleam with a new brightness, as if it had absorbed something from the girl. They never could explain what happened to Emma that night. The doll was buried with her, as her parents couldn't bear to look at it. But the legend of the cursed doll of Willow Creek lived on, passed down through generations as a warning to those who dared to ignore the dangers of playing with things that should be left undisturbed. And deep beneath the earth, in a forgotten grave, the doll waits for someone else to find it, for someone else to wind the key, for someone else to wake it from its slumber.